Okay, we're going to go through the material that you went through in Chavruta, or maybe not necessarily didn't get through everything. What we're going to do is no one submits their answers. The answers, this course is purely for you. I'm going to go through, so you'll see as we learn whether you've gotten your answers correct or not. That's part of the idea of learning the Chavruta and then having a shiur to sum it up. So let's read through our Mishnah first. Erev Pesachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. On the evening of Pesach. Now, what exactly Erev Pesach means? Erev Pesachim. So first of all, you would have expected it to say Erev Pesach, not Erev Pesachim. What Pesachim is plural. That means many Pesachim. What on earth are we talking about? Erev Pesachim. So some people, everybody calls this parak. It's one of the very famous prakim. In fact, many kids learn this in school. One of their first chapters that they learn in school of Gemara is this chapter. And it's really called Arvei Pesachim for many people. Arvei Pesachim means every Erev Pesach, year after year after year, and that's why it's in plural. It means Pesach evenings, all plural. That makes a lot of sense. But Erev Pesachim sounds very strange. So the first Tosfot on the page actually says, very interestingly, that if you say Erev, then you have to explain the word Pesachim. So why is Pesachim in plural? So the first thing to know is that Erev Pesach is different from every other Erev holiday, all the other Erev holidays, and this is going to be a theme that we're going to see throughout, particularly today and other days, which is that Erev Pesachim is really the day of Erev Pesach, which comes out in Yudalid. It's Yudalid Nisan, was a day where they sacrificed, they slaughtered the Korban Pesach. They did it during the day in the afternoon, and in fact, Erev has two meanings. We understand Erev Shabbat, right? What's Erev Shabbat? All day Friday is Erev Shabbat. But Erev also means evening and the afternoon, really. And the afternoon was when they brought the Pesach sacrifice. So Erev Pesachim could mean the afternoon where they sacrificed, Tosfot says, many Pesachim, many different sacrifices. And the second option, he says, is there's two Pesachs. What are the two Pesachs? There's Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. For those who missed the first Pesach because they were impure and they couldn't bring the sacrifice, so they have a Pesach Sheni, and maybe it's referring to that. Anyway, that wasn't the main topic, as I said, I want to discuss. Let's go through now the questions. So what we started with is this idea. It says in the Mishnah, let me pull it up on the screen. It says, Erev Pesachim, here, I'll pull it up from here. Erev Pesachim samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that on Erev Pesach, one should not eat samuch lemincha. What is samuch lemincha? This is a big question. What is samuch lemincha? So if you noticed, first of all, there's a question why someone can't eat from near the time of mincha until it gets dark. So there's a number, if we go through what kind of questions should we be asking? Number one, near mincha. What does samuch mean? How near to mincha? What does mincha mean? We said there's mincha gdola and there's mincha ktana. Then we have lo yochal. You can see how every word you can analyze here. Lo yochal means don't eat. Okay, now what's missing here? What can't you eat? What kind of foods can't you eat? And then we have adam, lo yochal adam. A person can't eat ad shetechshach, until it gets dark. Okay, so we basically have a number of words that we now said, there's a lot, you might have read this, and if you read the English, let's just read it very simply. On the eve of Passover, adjacent to mincha time, a person may not eat until dark. Sounds pretty simple. But if you start thinking about this, you can see already how many questions we ask. What is samuch? What is mincha? What can't you eat? And until it gets dark. In fact, it says adam. Does adam mean any person? We're going to see later that maybe it's actually referring to a specific person. Anyway, right now, we've asked a number of questions, so let's start answering our questions. So the first thing we have is the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, why shouldn't you eat in the afternoon? Classic reason, right? I remember when I was, I had a roommate years ago, and I remember if we go out to dinner, which was always a big deal if we ever went out to dinner, and we'd go out to dinner and she'd say, oh, I'm not eating all day because we're going out for dinner, right? You want to go out and you want to really enjoy and feel like, wow. So she basically, the idea there is that you want to make sure we have a big festive meal that night, and you want to go into that meal hungry, right? But it's not just about the meal. What the Rashbam says is, it's matzah shel mitzvah. You have a mitzvah to do right now. You have something very important to do, and you want to eat matzah l'te'avon when you're very hungry. And mishum hidor mitzvah. He says so that we beautify the mitzvah. Now this is interesting because if you want to beautify a mitzvah, usually we don't say it's forbidden for you to eat, right? Like what mitzvahs do we beautify? Beautifying a mitzvah isn't like, it's not about the mitzvah itself. It's about something nice, like an adornment to the mitzvah. For example, Hanukkah candles. I don't know if you're aware of this. Many people know this, but Hanukkah candles, you really only have to light one candle. And then they added, let's light more candles to make it nicer. And then there's a debate. How do you make it nicer? What's mahadrim? There's mahadrim and a mahadrim. Nicer way to do what we call hidur mitzvah, to make the mitzvah nicer. So he says that this is about making the mitzvah more beautiful. If you don't eat and you're starved, like going out to dinner with my friend, right? Then that's the idea. What's strange about the Rashbam is that if you look in the Gemara on Kuf Zayin, I don't know if you managed to get to it, but if you look in the Gemara on Kuf Zayin, and I'll pull it up right now, the Gemara in Kuf Zayin says two reasons as to why, okay, they question what is Samach L'Mincha. They asked exactly our question, and this is part of the fun about asking questions on the Mishnah, and then you get to the Gemara and you realize the Gemara asked the same questions that you asked, which is Samuch L'Mincha, Ibayalehu, Samuch L'Mincha. They asked a question. Samuch L'Mincha Gedola Atnan, were they talking about Mincha Gedola, 12:30 in the afternoon? O Dilma Samuch L'Mincha Ktanatan, or did they mean, I really, they don't get into the Samuch. Samuch means half an hour before, according to most interpretations. So did they mean half an hour before Mincha Gedola, which would really be 12? Or did they mean half an hour before Mincha Ktana, which would be 3 in the afternoon? So they say, let's try both options and let's see what the issue would be. Samuch L'Mincha Gedola Atnan, why would it be at 12 in the afternoon already? Umishum Pesach, because when the afternoon hits, you're obligated to bring the sacrifice of Pesach. Remember, I said Erev Pesach is different from all other holidays because you have to bring a sacrifice. Dilma ate l'mimshach va'ate l'imnuei mi'lemei ba'pischa. You might get distracted by eating, right? Eating is usually a big distraction, and you get involved in your meal. How many times is it that you sit at a meal and you could get carried away and you're talking and you're eating and you forget to take care of what you need to take care of? So here he says it's preventative. You have to watch out that you might forget to do the Korban Pesach. Oh, Dilma. And then the time would match because at 12 o'clock, that's when you're obligated to do the Korban Pesach. You actually don't bring it that early, but it's already when theoretically you could bring the Korban. Oh, Dilma Samuch L'Mincha Ktanatnan. Or maybe it means the later Mincha. Umishum Matzah. And then it's related to Matzah. And now what are you expecting him to say, the Gemara? Based on the Rashbam, you're expecting them to say, we want to make sure you eat matzah when you're hungry. But that's not what it says here. It says, Dilma ate lemichle lematzah achila gasa. What does this mean? You can see the English says excessive eating. Achila gasa is when you down an absolute ton of food, and it's disgusting. And in fact, there's a question about if you eat on Yom Kippur a crazy amount of food, you might not be obligated for eating on Yom Kippur, because achila gasa is not considered eating. When you shove food down your throat in a disgusting manner. Now, if you eat a big meal in the afternoon, now then it would be late in the day. You would eat later in the day, a big meal. Then what might happen? You might end up eating matzah, achila gasa, and then you won't fulfill the mitzvah. Forget about hidur mitzvah. Like, we're not even talking about beautifying the mitzvah. You won't even fulfill the mitzvah at all because you have to eat matzah, and it's not considered eating if it's achila gasa. So 2 reasons given in the Gemara here. Okay, well, if I did the chart, I don't know if people want to write in the chat if you got up to it and you had some ideas about what the difference is between these 2 opinions, right? Whether you say it's to prevent you from doing the Korban Pesach, right, so that you don't forget, or whether it's to eat matzah achila gasa. So either which way, right? What's the difference between them? So I thought of 2 answers. One is, if you say it's Lemei Bab Pischa, then what do you see? That it's having to do with that day, the mitzvah of that day. It's not preparation for Pesach. I introduced this Mishnah saying this Mishnah is all about what we have to do before Pesach. But this isn't. This is about that afternoon. There's a special mitzvah of the Korban Pesach. If you go with the second opinion, it's preparation for the evening. Okay, that's one difference. And also there's a difference in terms of why it's prohibited to eat. Is it prohibited to eat because we're worried you're going to get carried away? Or is it prohibited to eat because you won't be able to fulfill your mitzvah properly? So there's 2 different reasons as to why that would be. So anyway, this is a big discussion here about the two different reasons. And then the question that remains about this section is why did when the Rashbam gave his reason, how did the Rashbam, okay, this is important to understand in terms of our understanding of what happens in the Gemara, which is that the Rashbam is a commentator, and he came to comment on the Gemara, on the Mishnah really. And he had the Gemara in front of him. He's living much later, okay? He's living in I think around the 1200s. So when he comes, he's a commentary on the Gemara. He knows the Gemara. So you would have expected he would have chosen at least one of the options given in the Gemara. But the Rashbam doesn't view things that way. And this is why I really wanted to bring him. Because the Rashbam looks at the Mishnah and says, this is the Mishnah. The Mishnah, I have to read as the Mishnah. I know the Gemara commented and gave their reasons, but I have to think about it freely. And it's interesting, the Rashbam's commentary on the Torah is very similar. He has a very, what we call a pshat approach. He looks at it as just what the words say, and I want to understand these words without what the Gemara does and without the commentary. So he comes up with his own reason independent of the Gemara. So that's also very interesting. Okay, because of time, I'm not going to have a chance to look at everybody's answers, but I will look later while you're in Chavruta. Okay, the next thing that we had, the next question was, what about lo yochal? What kind of food can one not eat? It doesn't really say. So I'm going to leave that question open, okay? If somebody has extra time and they want to, after class, read the Tosfot suggests what kind of food, right? Again, if the issue is either distraction or we don't want you to be full, then obviously we seem to be talking about eating a more significant meal and not snacking or something like that. It's certainly not like Yom Kippur where you have to fast and you can't eat at all. So that's another question that comes up. The last thing I want to bring up before I throw you into Chavruta again is this idea, or independent study we should call it today because it's not going to end up being Chavruta, is this idea about ad shetechshach. Now, in the words of the Mishnah of the Gemara, they often bring other terms, okay? So again, it says, Samuch lemincha lo yochal adam ad shetechshach. So again, I wanted to think about why this would be answering the question. I said there's different kinds of questions you can ask. Why did it choose the words ad shetechshach? Usually in the Gemara, sometimes in the Mishnah, they sometimes use ad shetechshach, but usually they use until shki'ah, until sunset, until Seder kochavim, until the 3 stars come out. Or they could have used until you eat the matzah. If the whole idea is so that you come hungry to eating matzah, it should have said until you eat matzah. It could have said until you do the Korban Pesach. If we said it's so that you don't forget to slaughter the sacrifice, as soon as you do that, well, then we don't need to worry about it. But yet it said until it gets dark. Why did it say until it gets dark? So we don't really have an answer. That's the truth. We don't really know. But what I wanted to show you today is what Tosfot does with it. Tosfot takes this, okay, and I'll open it up on the screen. Tosfot takes this idea of ad shetechshach, and he does something interesting with it. So Tosfot says, I'll bring it up here. I didn't translate this into English, but Tosfot says, I'll read it and I'll translate. Tosfot first points out, afilu hitpalel. Oh, sorry. Actually, this isn't. No, this is the other Tosfot. My apologies. The Tosfot is not here on the page. I'll bring it up here. It's earlier up. Okay. So Tosfot says here, this is going to be hard to read here, but if you have a text in front of you, Tosfot says ad shetechshach over here. Okay, if you see on the screen. So he basically says, he quotes here. Okay, I'll basically paraphrase it, but what he says is, there's a difference between Erev Pesach and all the other holidays. And he says, I'm change my plan. I'm going to not read it inside. I'm just going to explain it. He says that the night of Pesach, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but you can bring in Shabbat early if you want, but you can't bring in Pesach early. Nobody davens early when it comes to Pesach. And it's the night that you would really want to make Pesach early because you want to start your Seder early with your kids, right? What we do is we try to do pre-Seder stuff with the kids when they're still, early in the evening. But Tosfot says here, on Pesach night, there's something special going on. It says, Ichlu et habasar balayla hazeh. You have to eat the Korban Pesach. It's all revolved around the Korban Pesach, which we don't have anymore. But in those days, it revolved around that. And it says you have to eat it at night. And then it says, and matzah and maror go together with Pesach. So even nowadays, when there's no sacrifice, there's a special mitzvah to do everything at night, because at night they got out of Egypt. And therefore, Pesach is different from all other holidays, and you can't bring it in early because you can't do anything until it's nighttime. And what you see here is there's two aspects of Pesach night. On the one hand, it's just like any other holiday. You have Kiddush, you have a meal. It's very similar. On the other hand, it has some other element, which is you're reenacting what happened. So it's true that I see you're saying, Connie, that you can't bring in Shavuot early either. That's a separate issue. But here they're saying specifically, this is different from a typical Shabbat or holiday, even though, yes, there are some holidays you also can't bring. But there's a special reason here, and that's because Seder night, something else is going on here. And that's what we're going to get at throughout, which is what's different about Leila Seder and what's the same when it comes to holidays. So this is another element that maybe it says Ad Shetachshach to remind you that specifically, or at least what Tosfot's taking from it is, this is where you learn that you have to do it that you have to do it at night and not anytime earlier. Okay, we're going to stop here and we're going to go to our next section of Chavruta.